Hello, everyone, and welcome to Family Reflections. This afternoon, we're speaking about family reflections and domestic violence and COVID-19. There's been a dramatic increase in domestic violence, and we're just taking the time this afternoon on this episode to speak to something that's been bothering us, speak to something that may have affected you or someone that you know. On the line with me this afternoon, I have Neva and Kendall. Say hello to the people.
Hello, good evening to everyone, and I hope that everyone is keeping safe during this coronavirus pandemic.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I would like to echo Mr. Kendall's sentiments. Stay safe, people. Stay inside if you're not needed to go outside.
All right, very true. On my end, my name is Keddy Emanuel. If you don't know me, I played Owen Marshall in Nana's Paradise, and you also know me from other films, and some of which where you probably didn't recognize me because I was a little child. But this afternoon, we're speaking to something that's relatively serious. Neva and Kendall, can you just give the people a short introduction to who you are and your background and kind of how you came across social science and social work?
So my name is Kendall, as you have indicated, and I am someone who believes that we all have a responsibility as human beings to contribute positively to the advancement of any society. And our communities, our countries are plagued with a number of social and economic issues. And I think that as citizens, our responsibility is not just that of criticizing, but that of being part of the solution. And this would have led to me getting involved with a number of community and youth organizations over the years. Some of these organizations include Tie-Dye, which did some theatrical work on the issue of HIV and AIDS and other social issues. The Bellevue Development Committee, which seeks to ensure that the needs and concerns of the people of Bellevue Vieux-Fort is addressed, and that would mean that I'm also from the culturally rich community of Bellevue Vieux-Fort, which we believe is the cultural capital of St. Lucia. So I am an individual who really gets excited as it relates to getting involved in community development. By way of academics, I would have started off initially pursuing sciences, but because of my involvement in youth work as a CARICOM Youth Ambassador, I decided that it was necessary for me to ensure that I have the right skill set, the right knowledge in terms of how do you carry out community development. And that would have led to me pursuing a Bachelor's of Science in the area of social work at the Caville campus of UWI, University of the West Indies. And later on, 2017 to 2018, I pursued a Master's of Arts in Social Development. That's at the University of Sussex. By way of employment, I would have had a stint working as a laboratory assistant, that's as a lab tech, as most people would know, at Campus B. And I would have taught for almost 11 years, 1 year at the Bellevue Primary School, and also for about 10 years at the Vieux-Fort Comprehensive Secondary School, one of the best schools on the island, if you ask me. And after teaching, I spent 2 years at the probation department, trying to ensure that persons who find themselves in conflict with the law, that they become empowered and they are able to live a life which is quite responsible and quite productive. And currently, I work as a social transformation officer or someone who promotes community development. And I'm attached with the Ministry of Equity, Social Justice, Community Empowerment, and Local Government. So that would be me in a nutshell. My favorite football team is Barcelona.
Likewise. And even now, I want to reach out to the people who are tuned in. Again, thank you so much for joining Family Reflections this afternoon. We just want to encourage you to not only like, but also share with your friends, and also let us know what you think. Talk back to us. The comment section is freely open to you, and you can just talk back to us. Let us know what you think. We'll talk about what you need. And going back to the conversation here with Neva, Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I am Neva. I am originally from the community of PI, which is part of Choiseul. However, I have been residing in the Vieux Fort constituency for a little over 7 years. I am the current 2020 youth parliamentarian for Vieux Fort South. I am employed at Ministry of Infrastructure. In terms of social work, I have always been actively involved in social groups from the time I think I was in primary school. And so that has helped me to develop my social work skills, if I should say. I am very passionate about helping individuals. And I think that passion really stood out to me. I think it was during my adolescent years. I struggled as a teenager to find my identity. And as a result, I figured, hey, I think there are other persons who are out there struggling. And I thought it was necessary to further my skills, my educational skills in that area. And so I decided to go on to studying social work with, at the time it was Safa Louis Community College. I pursued the certificate program in 2014. And no, it was 2012 actually. And in 2014, I commenced my stint at the University of the West Indies Open Campus. I recently graduated last year, October. And hopefully I become gainfully employed as a social worker so I can go out there and give back what I have learned, put it into practice.
Absolutely. Once again, I'm so glad to have you guys on the line this afternoon. There's something very interesting going on. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's said that estimates from the United Nations Population Fund suggest that 3 months of this quarantine would result in a 20% rise in domestic violence throughout the world. Now, there's something that just sounds strange to me, right? Because in 3 months, you would see a 20% rise in domestic violence just from people staying home. That's all that's happening. People are just staying home. So I just wanted to know, why do you guys think that is? Just off the top of your head.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's just necessarily because people are staying home. I think what we must try to understand is what could happen during this time of the pandemic when people are at home. With the pandemic, a number of countries have had to shut down. There has been the slowing down of business activity. A number of persons have been laid off. With that happening, that creates a lot of pressure on the persons who are supposed to be providing for families. And with that kind of pressure, that leads to people getting frustrated. And though it is not something which is recommended, and I don't think anyone should abuse anyone within a domestic setting, but not everyone has the best way of dealing with that amount of pressure of not being able to provide for their families. And also, what you find is that because of that, they may actually abuse the family members. And that is something that should not be happening, but that is the reality for a number of families. And I don't think St. Lucia is any exception. So another thing I could say which contributes to that is when someone has been the head of the household and then you are laid off, you cannot contribute. So it's sort of, there's something to their sense of who they are. And then some people do not deal in a good manner with that. And as a result of that, they resort to psychological abuse, they resort to physical abuse of the partners and other persons within the domestic violence setting.
Very interesting. Okay. What's your take, Neva?
Just to add to what Kendall has said, also because of the pandemic and because of frustration and everything that is going on, persons become a little more mentally unstable. And that too can also result in an increase in domestic abuse, especially if that person may have had, for instance, anxiety. That person may have overcome anxiety or overcome depression. And as a result of being laid off or just not being able to cope with, being indoors, because it is not normal to us to be enclosed or to be within our four walls for such a long period of time. I mean, in some places, lucky for us, we were only indoors for about a week, which is 7 days. But there are other countries that they've been indoors for more than a week, 2 weeks, sometimes even a month. And so the frustration of just being indoors, the frustration of not being able to go outside or not being able to take a cool walk, because these are things that can help calm you. And you're not able to do that. And so your frustration increases, your mental health also declines. And so that could also result in an individual leading to domestic violence. So it basically, so you're not able to do you.
All right.
Depression is something that is very, very, very serious. And you may not be able to identify it, but somebody with depression knows that they are depressed. And so I cannot go out for a walk. I cannot go out for a jog. Some persons resort to substance abuse. Even alcohol, they're not able to get that alcohol. And so all of that causes them to resort to domestic violence.
Yes. So it sounds like from what both of you said, there's a link between economic anxiety and domestic abuse, right? And that makes me curious, because if that is the case, you would find that there's an increase in domestic abuse in communities that are just less privileged from other communities, right? Communities that are less, quote unquote, financially affluent. Is that true?
Actually, okay. Actually, yes, it is true. However, we should not misconstrue the fact that domestic violence, it does not just happen in a poor household. It also happens in a household where the social class, they're in the middle class, in the upper class. It happens in no matter what your economic background is, domestic violence does happen. However, yes, I believe that it is probably more common in households that are poor. I believe it is more common. And I actually read something today by, I cannot remember the author, but he was saying that he showed the link between economic anxiety and domestic violence, and why why economic anxiety would lead to domestic violence. So I believe that yes, it does lead to domestic violence. However, domestic violence happens in any social class.
Okay. And Kendall, just before you take it away, I just want to remind the viewers and listeners that if you have any thoughts on this, you have the comment section open. We have a member of the team monitoring the line, and we will take any of your thoughts as well. So go ahead, Kendall.
Yeah, I certainly want to support what Neva has indicated. Domestic violence is not something which only occurs in families that are economically deprived. But in addition to that, we need to understand that it happens in different forms. We also need to recognize that we deal with a society which is patriarchal, where there are a number of men who believe that they are supposed to hold power over women. Women are supposed to submit to them. There are individuals who grew up in families where they saw women as being treated in a very terrible manner. Women being abused psychologically, insults being hurled at them, threats being made towards them. And for persons who would have grown up in such families, they believe that this is how it is supposed to be. So I would not say that it is something which pretty much occurs in poor families. It happens in all families, families that differ in terms of ethnicity and other social indicators. This is something that plagues a number of families. Yeah.
Now, I found what you mentioned there very interesting, because you mentioned patriarchy, right? Very often when people speak to domestic violence, there's an instant conclusion in your mind that this is something that men are doing to women, only.
Right.
And I resonate with what you said about it being a side effect of patriarchy. But what about instances where the woman is the perpetrator and not the victim? Does that occur?
Yeah, that too happens. But what you find is that you may not find instances of that being reported, as would occur in an instance where a guy physically abuses his spouse. Part of the reason for that is the individual, as a male, may feel a sense of shame, and other persons may ridicule that person because they would say, how could you allow for a woman who other persons may perceive to be the weaker sex physically to be abusing you? And so that person may not want to come forward and indicate that. But certainly there are instances where men are abused. There are situations where men bring the entire paycheck to the lady, and the lady is the one who would control, every single financial decision. Whereas it's supposed to be something which is based on, a discussion and there's consensus among the two individuals. So men too are victims of psychological abuse. There are instances where you find that women may say things to men which is quite intimidating. They're also victims of emotional domestic abuse, where the women would say things to them that allows for them to suffer from a low self-esteem or low self-confidence. So these things happen. It's just that with instances where men are the perpetrators, sometimes what you find is that it is usually in the form of physical abuse, and the effects of that are very visible. And it is something that society tries to respond to immediately, considering the impact it has. But it happens in terms of women actually being the perpetrators of domestic violence. But by and large, men would be, the main perpetrators.
Interesting.
Just to add to what Kendall has said, Keddy, also I think, we live in a society, a St. Lucian society, where our men they're raised to bottle up their feelings. And in addition to the shame, they feel they feel emasculated. They feel, why should I go out there and talk about what my wife or my girlfriend is doing to me? So they bottle all of that up. And that in itself, just bottling up their feelings, can also lead to them displacing their anger on their partner. So yes, they may be the victim, but however, they may also be the perpetrator just by simply bottling up all of those feelings that they have.
So if I understand you clearly, you're basically saying that the mishandling of being a victim can evolve into perpetration, right? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. But it's not even just domestic violence, but violence in general, though.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's something I wonder about that. Oftentimes I wonder, I know men are built differently physically, but do you think that men have an increased propensity to violence than women do? Is that something that is that a real thing?
That's a good question. Whether a man has a greater propensity to violence? Well, I would say if it is physical violence, I think one would stand to reason that if all other things being equal, that I see myself as being bigger and stronger than you are, and then you have done something which displeases me, then I believe I could exert my power over you and express it in the form of hitting you or punching you. So I would say from that perspective, one could say that there is a disparity in terms of physical strength between men and women. Also, like I said, we must understand the culture in which people are growing up. And if it is one where men are seen to be more powerful than women, men are supposed to be privileged over women, then clearly a lot of men may feel a sense of possession of women that they are supposed to be in a relationship with. So, to one extent, one could say, based on what we see in society, if you examine the prison population, if you examine the persons who are placed on probation for these sorts of assaults that refer to domestic violence or physical assault, it is usually men that you would find outnumbering females. But I think it is a combination of both biological factors, psychological factors, and also the macro structures in which we are socializing our men and women. Yeah, that's how I would say that.
Interesting.
Mr. Elva, you did indicate that prison population, you tend to get, when it comes to domestic violence, you tend to get more males. But I think, that's my opinion. That is just an opinion.
That's all right, sure.
I think we live in a society now, our society is slowly shifting, and women feel a lot bolder. Because of the roles that they play in society now, because of the positions that they hold in society now. And so it goes back to what we said initially. The men will not necessarily report it, and so that would probably result in why the prison population would be higher in terms of for domestic violence. But I think women are a lot bolder, and they feel they have that strength. It may not be physical strength, but I think women are a lot more empowered. And just this empowerment makes them feel that they have that strength to abuse a man. That's my opinion. I'm subject to correction, but that is just my personal opinion on that question.
Right. And no, that makes sense. And in fact, it actually leads me to another thought, which is a little out of the box. But if men are less likely to report domestic violence, doesn't that mean that men are at greater risk because they don't report it?
Yes, I think I would say yes. And my reason for this, I'm digressing just a little. If you realize, statistics have shown that men are more likely to commit suicide and resort to suicide as a means of dealing with the issues that they experience. And who knows? These are some of the issues that they experience at home that could, and I'm saying could lead to them resorting to suicide. So, it really depends.
Interesting. What about you,
Yeah,
Kendall?
I don't necessarily know whether I would say that men are at greater risk, because the question then becomes, who is more likely to be the victim? And I think I would like to focus on what the statistics show. And it generally shows that women are the ones who are usually the victim of domestic violence. And I think we have explored the reasons for that. So yes, I do understand that the fact that we don't have a culture where men are likely to come out if they are domestically abused, that could lead to them continue being victims of domestic violence. But by and large, I think that the research would show that if you have more women being the victim, it suggests, based on that we can conclude that they are at greater risk. Because it is what we could measure that we could make definitive statements about. And whereas I do understand that men are victims of domestic violence, but I think it is more an issue that our women are battling with, and it is something that deserves urgent and comprehensive attention.
Okay. That makes complete sense. It just makes me wonder also, and before I say this, I'm going to speak to the live audience as well. Again, thank you for joining us. Make sure you like this video and you share it. But the thought I was really going to just share there is, I wonder how the motivations between a woman that becomes a perpetrator of domestic violence, beating her husband or beating her boyfriend, differs from the motivation behind a man who's beating his wife or his girlfriend? Are the motivations exactly the same across both genders, or are they different? What do you all think about that?
I think it really depends. You see, with domestic violence, there are so many factors that are to be taken into consideration. And I think Mr. Elva pointed that out earlier. One being poverty, or just an individual in the household being the main breadwinner. Also, and it goes both ways. It could be either the male or the female. You know, there are persons who were raised in domestic homes, domestic abuse homes. They were exposed to it, and as a result, they in turn they grew up doing exactly that, because to them it seemed normal. So the motives really, it really, I wouldn't say a male's motive differs from a female's motive. It balances out, if you ask me. I mean, it really to me it balances out, because I can be a female and I grew up seeing my mom being abused, and a male grew up seeing his father abusing his mother, and to him that's what is love, because that's what he knew love to be. And so that resulted in him now abusing his girlfriend or his wife. And also, a woman may stay in and take the abuse because to her that is what she knew as love. So she saw it, she thought it was normal, that's the norm. And so she sits and accepts it. And also she thought it's normal. She saw her mom abusing her father. So she thinks, hey, that's the norm. Let's carry on with it. And I mean, you really cannot blame these persons. This is how they were raised.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't really know that their motivation. I think it's situational. It depends on the individual. It depends on the triggers. And it could vary from person to person, but at the heart of it has to do with there being a power imbalance. At the heart of it has to do with exercising control over the other individual. And there are different things that may motivate an individual to seek to gain a greater degree of power. And that is coercive power, or power to really cause harm, cause pain, whether it is physical or psychological or emotional. So I think based on that, I don't necessarily know whether men are biologically wired to want to exert themselves over women more. I think that is something which is up for debate. So what I would say, it depends on the situation, it depends on the individual. But at the heart of it is just that certain individuals believe that they own other persons, they want their ways to prevail. They are not able to exercise emotional intelligence, and that is why they somehow resort to domestically abusing another individual. Yeah.
So, one word that you mentioned there that really stuck with me was power, right? You said oftentimes in those situations, there's a power imbalance. And from what you're both saying, that power imbalance can come from financial, or it can come from just a physical thing, or
physical friends. Also, psychologically, when you consider the individual's self-esteem, self-worth, because if somebody believes that they are someone who is valuable, or someone who is important to society and others, what you find is that they are more likely to resist and get out of such relationships. But when you have somebody who does not think much of themselves, or people who are totally hopeless, these individuals are not the best at putting up a fight. I don't mean a physical fight. I basically mean finding means and ways to put an end to the domestic violence and empowering themselves to go forward. So that is how I would look at that particular situation.
Right. And you also mentioned something there that brings me to another question. Oftentimes, I think it's oversimplified when people talk about the spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend in a violent relationship, that can't seem to get out, can't seem to leave. And we get mad at that person and we judge that person. But why do you think those people a lot of the time just can't bring themselves to separate themselves from a bad situation or even see that it is a bad situation?
Okay. There are a number of reasons that persons remain in these situations, these domestic abuse situations. One of them being out of fear. The perpetrator may threaten them that if they leave, I will kill you. And I mean, it has happened before. Also, again, as a result of economic power. So that person may not necessarily be working, and that individual, the perpetrator, has been caring for that individual and the family. And so leaving them, again, it really boils down to, I mean, the person's self-worth. So if you feel like you're not going to amount to anything if you leave, then why leave when you're being taken care of? So it may seem as if that somebody else might see your potential, but you may not necessarily see your potential, and as a result, you may say that that's abuse. Also, in the name of love, like I said earlier, some persons view that as love. To them, this is what they know as love. Right. You have persons who came from child abuse, they grew up. So it really, a lot of factors have to be taken into consideration. And sometimes we need to also understand the plight of persons. We need to not cast judgment as to why persons remain in those situations, but we need to examine their situation. We need to examine the reason. And sometimes persons really, I mean, the individual needs help. Both the victim and the perpetrator, they need help. So there are a lot of factors that are to be considered when persons remain in those homes. I guess Ms. Delva would elaborate a little more on some of these.
Yeah, not necessarily elaborate. I think what has been shared is quite sufficient. But I also want to look at matters relating to the amount of support which is provided by governments, by civil society organizations. Like you have indicated, Neva, when people become victims of domestic violence, they tend to experience a state of helplessness. They experience low self-esteem. They really cannot see a way out of it. And our responsibility is not that of blaming them, but trying to see how they can best be empowered. And that is something that requires a very eclectic approach and something which is long-term. It can be expensive because for you to really ensure that someone could recover from instances of domestic violence, in addition to addressing the psychological issues, the psychological harm that this person has incurred, you now need to figure out, okay, how does that person make ends meet in a manner which is sustainable? And that is something I believe that government should really look into in terms of the amount of support that we expose these individuals to. Because at the end of the day, if the person is not able to get to a state of financial independence, they may find themselves in a relationship where they have to depend on a man who knows that that lady is weak financially and they want to take advantage of that person again. So we need to explore instances of how do we build the capacity of these victims so at least they become more marketable by way of finding jobs, or how can you empower them to create their own jobs. So it's a matter of rebuilding the person and connecting the person to opportunities that they could actually make the best use of. And if we could do that, then I think it is less likely that these individuals would return to these relationships. But I think we need to speak, even with regards to our education system, there are subtleties, there are aspects of the hidden curriculum whereby it sort of privileges men over women. And we need to unpack these things, we need to get rid of these things, and we need to generally promote a situation where women feel equal to men. Women do not feel that men are supposed to be the head. So So there are lots of things that would ensure for women to remain in these relationships. And we need to try to address it from several perspectives to ensure that we have women or persons who were once victims, that they are now in a state of empowerment and they could proceed forward and have a decent future.
Do you think... Oh, go ahead, Niva.
Okay. Additionally, Mr. Elva, I think one thing that we also need to, I need to put out there is that just by throwing that perpetrator in jail does not solve anything. The individual will come out a few years later and the individual will go back to abusing somebody else. And so I believe the support services also need to take into consideration intervening on the perpetrator's behalf, because I think obviously there is an underlying issue there with that person that has caused them to go out there and abuse somebody else. And so it is important to get them the help that they need so that this does not continue in another relationship.
Yeah, certainly.
Right. Mm-hmm. And there's two things there that I want to touch on. So the first thing, you mentioned that we need to promote a greater feeling of equality among women, where women feel more equal to men. In 2020, do we still believe there's still women that don't feel that they're equal? Is that still something that we still need to address?
I think just a small minority of women. I think now there are so many women empowerment sessions, women empowerment books, channels, so many things that cause women to feel empowered. And so I think it's just a very small minority. Again, I am subject to correction.
Let me be a bit troublesome with that particular question. Because women would say to you, they like a man who will take charge of them.
Yes, Kendall, I quite agree.
And I hear that statement from women high up in society, women who have been exposed to quality education, and women who are successful. So
Kendall,
what do you respond to?
Kendall, I agree, and I've heard the very same. But when they say in charge, I don't think it's in charge in that sense. I think they want to know that, yes, at the end of the day, I am with a man that can stand and you can say, okay, I make some of the decisions and whatnot. But I don't think them saying that they want a man to be in charge necessarily means. I mean, that's what it is. I still believe women feel they're very empowered and equal to men. I think that very, very much so.
I do agree with you. I think that the majority of women generally feel a great sense of empowerment. And I think if you examine the trend of domestic violence, I think more women are now empowered to getting out of abusive relationships, recognizing the signs of it and not continuing the relationship. So it's certainly something which I could say augurs well for women. But I think that we still need to educate women so at least they truly understand their worth. And it is not one which is supposed to be subjected to that of a man, because there is still, you said it was a minority, but for every one lady which is violated, that to me is one lady that should never be violated. That is a case that should be addressed. So I think that we should come to a rest when domestic violence is something which is of the past and women are not victims of domestic violence. So there is still a need to ensure that our women are taught their worth and they are given the skill set, the life skills to ensure that no individual will take advantage of them in a relationship.
Mr. Elva, we also need to educate our men. We also need to educate our men on their self-worth. We also need to educate our men on, so many other aspects, because like we said earlier, so many reasons. There are so many reasons why they resort to violence. So we also need to not just educate our women, but we need to educate our men. We need to teach them. And I think this is something that we should include from a very tender age, how to deal with anger, how to cope with, stressful situations and frustration. And it really boils, we need to not just educate our women, we need to educate persons across the border. We need to educate both male and female, boy and girl.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I completely agree with that. And, while you guys were discussing that, one thing came to my mind, which is if you have, yes, it's common for women to say, I want a man to take charge, right? And that is understandable. But if a man walks up and he's like, I want a woman I can take charge of.
What does this mean?
Is that a warning sign now?
If a man says
if a man says, hey, we've established that it's okay for a woman to say, I want a man that will take charge. But is it okay for a man to say, I want a woman I can take charge of?
My view of it, to an extent, I understand what Neva is saying. But I do not like the terminology of I'm in charge, or saying that you want to be in charge of someone. That to me is a reflection of power imbalance. That to me is sort of privileging another person over you. And why not say, I want someone who we could come to a consensus on matters. And the word charge suggests a degree of authority. And I will suppress maybe your views, So the word charge to me is not a right word.
I honestly think that the term is loosely used. Sometimes persons place a lot of meaning to it, but I think it's a term that is used very loosely.
Yes, I know. Let me just make a quick point. You see, it is in the subtleties that power is hidden. Because sometimes people will not state things explicitly. But to me, when you say you want somebody to be in charge of you, it is to an extent you giving certain things up for that person's, viewpoint to come through. I don't think any lady necessarily will say that she wants a guy who would beat her. There are instances where it happens, but I don't think the statement should be taken as a lady would want to be with a guy who would beat her or abuse her. I don't think so. But it sort of reflects to me the patriarchal nature of society when we have statements like that I want somebody to be in charge of me. And for me, he asked the question, what if a guy says it? What does that mean? Personally, I will not sound to be in charge of anyone. I respect everyone's dignity and worth. I believe in the equality of human beings. So I will not say that. And it would lead me to question, but why should I be saying that to somebody? And it's a woman that I want to be in charge of? Seriously? She's not an object. She's a human being. So I would want somebody who we could build a future with. I will not use such authoritarian terms such as being in charge. I don't know. This scares me.
So
I think it's, to be honest, I've heard men say they want to be with a woman who they can take charge of. And when they say take charge of, they mean be the man. They don't want to feel emasculated. They don't want to feel, they don't want you to belittle their ego. They still want, men have a huge ego. They want to believe, they're powerful and that kind of thing. So I think sometimes, and I'm saying sometimes, the operative word there is sometimes, they just mean they want to wear the pants in their relationship. Because how men, y'all are men, so you know how men are. And
yes, we know how we are.
We know how quickly your egos can be bruised, So I think when a man says, I want someone I can take charge of, they don't necessarily mean that they're taking charge of, as in ordering that person around. But, they just want to feel like they're the ones wearing the pants in their relationship. They can say, okay, yes, you're saying that, you can make decisions together, but there are instances where the man wants to be heard. He wants to have the final say, basically. And if you ask me, I see
hold on.
What's that? I see nothing wrong with that, but if as a woman, if a man says he wants to be in charge, then you'd have to pay attention to the signs. So when he says he wants to be in charge, if you say you're going out with your friends, does he say no? Or does he wants to know so many little fine details that are not necessary. So these are the things that you pay attention to when a man says, I want to be in charge, right? If you're not working and how he goes about, with the finances, these are the little things that you ought to pay attention to when a man says, I want to be in charge. But if a man says, I want to be in charge, and there are no little red flags, then all well and good, be in charge.
Yeah, so I just want to butt in and say, I think, and I knew I would spark some fires with that question, but I want to butt in and say that I think when a woman says that, she wants a man who can take charge or kind of wear the pants, she just means that she wants a man who is not a pushover. Somebody who has opinions that he can share, somebody who can lead in a way that includes her own qualities, in a way that is not overly assertive, but is still a strong leadership and dependable, reliable person that she can partner with, right?
I don't have an issue in terms of the red flags that Neva indicated that we need to look out for, or the way you're explaining it. But then I would say that, yes, we have to look out for the signs, but that kind of term itself of saying, I want to be in charge,
So for you, that's definitely a serious warning sign, right?
It's very strong language to me. I believe in equality. I don't see the need to say that to any lady to suggest that a masculine individual. Like I've said, certain words, they are embedded with certain meanings, and they are reflective of certain structures. Like I said, it could be patriarchal structures in a very subtle manner. And when I hear the use of such terms, I don't think that we should say that there isn't a degree of wanting to assert power or for your views, to be the one which is more dominant. So when we say these things of charge, I'm in charge. If I say I'm in charge of something, you know what this means?
Right. You say what goes, right?
Yeah, to an extent, it carries that with it. But I clearly understand. I mean, every guy who says that, or every lady who says that, she needs a guy to be in charge, that she necessarily needs a guy to overpower her. I fully understand the nuances of what Niva was presenting. So I clearly understand where she's coming from, and you also.
All right. So here's the thing. I want to branch out of this a little bit and discuss children in these relationships, because when I played Owen Marshall in Nana's Paradise, there was a scene where I'm studying in a little distance away from my home, and my brother comes and calls me and he's like, Owen, pa bitma, right? And then I take off running behind him, and my siblings are outside of our house, and they come to me looking for help as the eldest brother. And we run into the house. When we get into the house, my mother in the film, her face is, bruised up. She has blood all over her shirt. And I can tell you, even though I was acting that part, I was very upset. After the cameras were shut off and the scene was done, I was so upset I had to go outside and just relax and just get myself together, because the emotions you feel in that moment are real, right? When you just really get yourself into the role. So my thing is, in cases where children are in the middle of these relationships and children see their mothers beaten or they see their fathers abused, what should the child do? What does the child do? Especially a child who is now coming of age and becoming physically strong enough to rise in defense,
Firstly, I would say children react differently to domestic violence. It really depends on how they perceive the violence. It depends also on how the extent of the violence. So based on experiences, traumatic experiences, how traumatic the violence was to them. Plus, the children who are growing, who are of age, where they have a better understanding of the situation, I think it's important to get help. It is very, very important to get help, because that moment right there, or that situation, or the few times that the child has witnessed it, can shape their behavior as they age. And so I think the best thing to do is to seek help from somebody. It could be a teacher, it could be the school's counselor, it could be an auntie, it could be an uncle. But it is important to seek help, because it will have a direct effect on that child. Although there are instances where children, they don't necessarily show any behaviorism, any issues when it comes to behaviors as they grow old. Nonetheless, a great majority of them have issues once it is not resolved.
All right. So, Neva, do you think then that it's okay, or can be even a little justified, when, let's say, a young man sees his father, beating up his mom, and he rises up to defend her? Is that justifiable in any way? Is there? What would you tell him?
Honestly, I don't think it is. I mean, in the heat of the moment, it may seem like the right thing to do, but it can have consequences. I mean, the father may lash out on that child, even though you're 20 or 16 or 17, the father may lash out on that child. So I think it has to be something that you carefully examine before you just stand up to that father, because out of anger, he may not necessarily mean it, but in the heat of the moment, he may lash out on you. And it may worsen the situation. It may get you to be even more angry. So I think the best thing to do, I mean, if you are of age and you're witnessing something like that, just call 911. Like, you just call the police, you call for help. Mr. Elva, I think his professional expertise would.
I think my phone may die shortly, Mr. Emmanuel. Yes, I do not know.
Well, if your phone dies, don't worry about it. Me and Neva can continue the conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think I'm at 1% at this point in time, which is terrible. Yeah. I mean, my view on it, like Neva has indicated, it's always better to seek help. And I don't think I necessarily encourage anyone to physically violate another person. But the pragmatic aspect of it is that if you as a child is physically able to prevent more harm being incurred by someone who's been abused, in terms of trying to restrain your father or whoever the person is, then I think if you have the physical ability to do so, then you should at least attempt to do that. But if in your judgment, you lack the ability to do that, and then when you get involved, it only worsens the matter, and then you lose your life, likewise your mother and stuff like that. But then the best thing would be to try to dissuade him, try to talk him out of what he's doing as a child, to me. And then, you seek help as Neighbor has indicated. But I would not necessarily say that a child is supposed to jump on a father who's just beating up, the mother, and start to fight. But then if, you have because there are some children, who maybe 17, 18, who do have the physical ability to restrain another person from, hitting another person. So if you have that ability, then you should, maybe try to do that and talk to the individual. Yeah, that's how I say it.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree. So basically, it sounds like what you're saying is, if you can stop it, then stop it.
Yeah, if you can, because some children, they are able to do it. It depends on the situation. But I would not recommend that you start to fight with the individual. But the thing would be to prevent it, to restrain the individual who's trying to punch or hit, the victim as much as possible. Because I don't think I'd be able to, if I have the ability to stop, let's say, my father from beating up my mother, I think I would do something if I have the physical ability to prevent him from doing such. I'm not saying I'll fight with him, but I'll start maybe try to hold his hands or, talk to him, tell him to stop doing it or something of that nature. Yeah, at least what is taking place in front of me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. My next question and the next thing on my mind is, oftentimes we treat an abuser as always an abuser. If you abuse once, that is what you are, that is what you do. Is it true that once an abuser, always an abuser? If somebody go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, that's a tricky question. if the person, if it happens and the person gets the help that they need, then that individual may not necessarily resort to abuse again. However, if intervention is not sought, if the person does not receive the help that he or she needs, then chances are that person will continue. I mean, you have to stop the individual. So sometimes, yes, it happens once and it never happens again. However, sometimes if you don't get it, that is why I stress on the fact that I think it is very important to get help for the abuser. The abuser needs to get the help that they need. Until then, the chances of that person continuing the abuse they're likely to continue the abuse. So I believe it is important for them to get the help. However, sometimes you have persons who get the help and they may get something that triggers them and they resort back to the abuse. But I wouldn't say once an abuser, always an abuser. I believe it is important to get help if you are to discontinue that. Because again, like I said earlier, and like Mr. Kendall said earlier, there is an underlying issue as to why an individual resorts to domestic abuse, to abusing their partner. And so unless you get to the root of that, then the chances of you continuing that abuse is most likely.
So let's bring it home, right? Let's make it a little more personal. Let's say you have a sister, right? You have a sister who has a boyfriend or husband who hit her, right? And he hit her one time, right? There was one really bad argument and then he just lost it and he grabbed her and did something stupid. He goes and gets help. Would you tell her to make amends and get back into the relationship? Or is it, he hit you? That's it. That's the end.
I cannot tell her to leave or to stay. I mean, it really depends on how she feels about it, whether she believes that the individual has changed. My advice to her would be to be mindful. If she does stay, to be mindful, to pay attention to any red flags. And if anything raises your alarm, then hey, you should leave. But I cannot sit and say, as a professional, when I become a social worker, I cannot sit and say to a client, you should leave your partner because you're abused. I cannot say that. I will definitely encourage you to get the help that you need. I will link you to the necessary resources. However, I don't think I would just come to you and say, leave. Because, there are relationships, and I know a lot of relationships where persons, they have had physical fights and physical altercations during an argument, and they decided to stay, and that has never happened thereafter. And so to tell somebody to leave, I would just give them the best advice and to ensure that they get the help that they need. But I wouldn't necessarily say leave or stay. That's my personal view.
All right. It makes sense to me. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. We knew the time would pass quickly.
I know.
Thank you to every single person who is on the live watching us right now. We've had a great conversation with you all. You can tune in the next 2 weeks. Family Reflections is a bi-weekly event where we talk about what we want to talk about. And we're looking forward to talking to you in the next 2 weeks. Tune in. See you guys soon. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.